Hey, good morning, and welcome to what is the October Kids Club pick for Goldie Vance here at Comix Experience in the Kids Club. Good morning, guys. Thanks for coming out. I know it's an early morning, and everybody looks really tired this morning. We're here with Hope Larson. Thank you so much for joining us, Hope.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We love the book. It was a great book. I've heard a lot of positive things from a lot of the kids, and so we're pretty excited. I guess my first question will be, given the theme of the book, is how was your hotel last night?
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No crimes.
No crimes.
No crimes. All right.
Cozy.
Good.
I love it.
Yeah. Good. Very good. Very good. So you're an interesting guest, because we've had 15, 16 cartoonists in for the Kids Club so far, and you're an interesting guest that you're the first one that I can remember, at least, where you're a cartoonist yourself, but what you're doing here is just the writing. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference between doing your own comics, where you're writing and drawing them, and writing them for someone else.
Yeah. Should I take the mic?
Okay. Or that.
Do I need to talk into this for the podcast,
or
or
directly into it? We're good.
Okay. So I've been doing comics for like 12 years or so professionally, and most of my books I write and draw, but I've in the last 3 years or so, I've started making this shift over to mostly writing and doing less drawing. I'm still drawing some books, but most of what I'm doing, I'm writing Batgirl, I'm writing Goldie Vance, writing Compass South, which is this one. Mostly working with other artists, and the process isn't super different for me in terms of the writing. What's happened as I've started working with other artists more often is that my scripts have gotten more detailed and more specific, and I break everything down into pages and panels, and I write out pretty significant detail, for me anyway, compared to what I used to do, what's happening in every panel. And now that I'm used to doing that for other people, that's the way I write the scripts that I draw myself as well. And it's also helpful because it's easier for my editors to understand what's going on if I write a pretty detailed script. And that way I can get better editorial, and when the script does go to the artist, it's pretty solid.
When you were doing your own comics, were you writing out full scripts? I mean, do you do full scripts for yourself?
I didn't used to. I used to write sort of a screenplay style script, more or less, in that it wasn't broken down into pages. And when I was sitting down to draw that day, I would figure out what was going to fit on the page. So I didn't really know how long my books were going to be with those earlier ones. And publishers don't like that either. It turns out they like to know, they like to crunch the numbers and know how expensive your book is going to be, and they need to know how many pages long it will be. And obviously, when you're writing for issues, every page is really important, because with Goldie Vance, I have 22 pages, and with Batgirl, I have 20. So that's not a lot of pages to tell a story, and you really got to make them count.
Is there a challenge in that 20 versus 22, like fitting everything in that you need to fit? Do you find that, like, you get to the end of the issue, you're like, oh, there's like these 3 things that I need to put in, or oh God, I have 2 more pages to go and I don't know what to do? Do those kinds of things happen?
Kinda. I never get to I never have 2 pages to fill. It's more like, how am I going to make everything fit? How do I squeeze it in and not make it feel like it's just like squished in there? So it gets easier. You get a better sense of what's actually going to fit in an issue.
Sure.
It's a learning experience. I'm always trying to get my panel count down, because I feel like the ideal would be like 5 panels per page, but sometimes you just can't. And sometimes you want more for whatever reason anyway. Sometimes you want like 12 tiny panels of like extreme close-ups of stuff happening, and that's cool too. But as a general rule, I don't like to go over 7 panels, because I feel like it's an undue burden on the artist. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Have you had any like traditional like learning or anything, or is it just all from like your personal, just like what you think?
Yeah, I'm mostly self-taught as far as comics. I did go to art school, but I didn't study any comic stuff. I didn't study writing. I've just always been a huge fan of comics and movies and TV, and have taught myself the storytelling stuff along the way, and the cartooning stuff pretty much too.
Who were your early influences in comics?
Um,
When you were young?
I have kind of an interesting history with reading comics, which is that I started reading them when I was in France when I was 7 or 8. My dad's a professor, and he moved the family over for a year while he was translating this book. And comics are they're more of a normalized part of culture in Europe, which is really awesome because you can get them anywhere and you don't have to go to a special shop. Obviously things have changed a lot since I was that age in the 80s. And now comic shops are great and really welcoming and more kid-friendly than they were when I was growing up. But anyway, so it was easy for me to get these comics. I was reading Tintin, I was reading Asterix, I was reading a lot of Scrooge McDuck translations because they would sell them at the train station. You could just get like a big, fat reprint of Scrooge McDuck.
They were all in French?
All in French, yeah. And my parents would buy them for me because it was helpful with my French comprehension.
Yeah. So but you were still learning French at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't.
So you were learning a language and learning.
Yeah, and comics as well.
The language of comics.
Exactly. Yeah. So then I came back to the U.S. and I was, a year later, and I was not sure where to find more comics because I felt weird about superhero comics. My parents felt weird about them at the time. They were not super kid friendly to me, to like a 9-year-old girl. So then I didn't really read comics at all until I got to high school. And then I started reading manga because that was getting translated and coming over. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. They're so funny. And I liked the book format. And all my friends and I would take turns buying the next volume of whatever, and we'd all read it, and it would get passed around the school, which is pretty rad. Then in high school and college, I got into indie comics, so like Dan Clowes, Chris Ware. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for college, and Dan Clowes and Chris Ware both went there, and some other people. Jeff Brown, I think, went there. Lucy Knisley. Anyway, got into indie comics. Then I started drawing my own, and now I'm into the superhero stuff too. Yeah. So I've read it all. I love it all. It's great. I love that. Yeah, I love it all.
It was actually a real surprise when we saw you announced on Batgirl. Not because we didn't think you could do it.
I think it was a surprise to everyone.
It was just such a difference. How did that come along? Did an editor approached you, I assume?
Kind of. I was introduced to Rebecca Taylor Tay, who is one of the editors on Batgirl, along with Mark Doyle, kind of socially through a friend, and we hit it off. I did a short story for Gotham Academy Yearbook, and I was invited to pitch on Batgirl based on that. And then I got it. That's kind of it. I'd been wanting to move into more of an action adventure space anyway, and that's what I've been writing with Compass South and with my next couple of books, which are not superhero, but I felt like I was, while not a superhero reader traditionally, I understood the sort of storytelling. Sure. And like I love it and I respect that kind of thing. So it's just like a matter of mastering the minutia of superhero comics and the format.
Yeah, there's a lot of minutia.
There's a lot. I really rely on my editors.
How often are you turning in a script and they're like, nah, you can't do that because of this thing that happened in a comic book from 1962? Not
very often, and a lot of that has to do with Rebirth,
right?
Because the continuity has been reset so many times, and it just doesn't go that far back. Like I'm still in the storyline that started with Gail Simone's run. We haven't rebooted Batgirl, but it only goes back so far. Sure. And then there are all these other arcs, which I sort of think of as being parallel universes or something like that. So if I want to pull something out of there and use it as an Easter egg or use an old character. Usually I can, and it's not a problem. There have been times when I couldn't use characters because other people were doing stuff with them that hadn't been announced yet. That's really where you run into problems, where you want to use somebody, but they're locked down by some other team.
Oh, that's interesting. You did the adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time. I'm assuming that was a favorite book growing up?
Yeah, for sure. It was one of my favorites. I read it a lot. I read the rest of the quintet, which I prefer the other books in the series to A Wrinkle in Time, but that's the one everybody knows. That was like a cold call from an editor. She just reached out and asked if I would be interested in doing that. And it was one of those emails where you're like, this can't be real, because he would be asking me to, out of the blue, adapt this classic book. But it was real, and I ended up taking the job and spending 2 years of my life drawing this 400-page beast.
What was it like taking an existing book and trying to translate it into a completely different format? It strikes me that's probably a very challenging.
Yeah, it actually wasn't that bad for me for a couple of reasons. One, my editor didn't want to cut or change anything, and I didn't either. So we weren't trying to abridge or condense things very much at all, which is why it's so long. And also because, and I didn't find this out till after I'd finished drawing the book, but it really lent itself to a visual medium because it's not a very visual book, weirdly. Madeleine L'Engle was an actress in New York for a long time, and the way she writes, I think, is really informed by plays. So there's a lot of dialogue and not a lot of description. So I felt like I could actually bring myself into the project, and I could make it, because there wasn't really a framework of stuff happening except in the broadest sense. I could really impose my vision on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a beloved book. Was there any fear of
messing it up?
Yeah,
yes.
messing it up, I guess.
Yeah. When it was announced, I got so much hate. People were really upset.
Right.
Because you're always destroying somebody's childhood when you take on a project like that. So, I mean, but the good thing about that is when people assume you're going to fail, you can only do better than that. Yeah. And because the adaptation was so faithful that we did, I think people were pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. So the reaction's been
great. Yeah. Yeah. People were really afraid that I was going to mess it up.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Is she
Madeleine L'Engle? She's dead.
She's dead. Okay.
Yeah.
So was there an estate involved?
Yes.
I mean, so they give you notes, or were they just?
They actually didn't really. They basically communicated with my editor and not with me. So I don't know if there was stuff they wanted to change and it just got blocked and never got to me, which is possible, but I really don't think so, because I've met most of her family who run her estate, and they're so nice. Super, super sweet and super supportive. And they actually were the ones who spearheaded the whole graphic novel adaptation. Okay. So they were on board from the get-go, which is really like the ideal adaptation situation.
Have you ever read the book, Ben? No, you should. It's a good book.
Oh yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So now that you have experience with both writing and drawing, could you say that you prefer one or the other?
I prefer writing, but there's something special about writing and drawing your own story. Like there's a place you can only get to when you're doing both. Because the thing about just writing is that you write the script and then you hand it off to somebody else, and in a way that's you can influence the art after it's drawn, but I like to not be super involved and meddling with my artists, because I feel like my job is the writing, and it is more or less over when I send that script off to them. I have lost my train of thought a little bit. Yeah.
How collaborative is a book like Goldie Vance? Is it just out of your head, or you and Brittany like getting together and meeting and having coffee, or maybe just being on the internet and talking it out ahead of time, or what is the process on this book?
It's not super collaborative, but the way that this came together, we basically came up with the characters in the world and built them in tandem. So I had an idea of what the world was going to be and what the characters were going to be like. And Brittany came on so early that we were able to, our work was able to inform each other's work. So I felt like creating the idea in the world was very collaborative, but then beyond that, I basically write the scripts and she draws them.
So, could you see yourself doing a book where you're both writing and drawing?
Yeah, I actually I'm finishing one up right now, and I also have a webcomic, which is not for kids, but I write and draw that. So I think I'll keep doing both. It's a lot to juggle drawing a book and also writing comics at the same time, but
especially you've got at least 2 regular books, right?
Yeah.
That you're doing.
It's brutal.
Plus the graphic novels. I mean, that's
yeah.
Are there different muscles creatively involved in writing a long form graphic novel versus stuff that's serialized in 20-page chunks?
Yeah. Honestly, I think they're equally hard. Like writing a graphic novel and writing an issue of something, it kind of feels the same to me, because a graphic novel is one thing and an issue is like one thing. You're crafting basically a very, very, very short graphic novel is what it feels like as a writer. So writing a graphic novel takes longer, but feels like less work in a way.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. One of the things that this industry used to have a lot of, which we don't anymore, are short stories and places where authors could kind of learn their craft 6 to 8 pages at a time.
Yeah.
And I often think that the shorter something is, the harder it is, because you have to distill it. You have to be really focused on what your idea is. Whereas if you've got 120 pages, you can go off on tangents, and you're not going to affect the overall work, probably, depending on what the work is.
I mean, you will and you won't. I think like the tangents and the meandering quality is one of the advantages of getting to do something longer, is that you can explore ideas in different ways. Yeah. You can. And I love that, but I also love the really condensed storytelling. And actually, I wish there were more opportunities for me to write short stories, because they're so fun, and they're more fun. The shorter I work, the more fun it is to write like 6 pages,
right?
Or 3 pages or 2 pages,
Because it's kind of like cracking a riddle or something.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It's really fun, and then like it's over so fast.
Yeah. That's very good. If we've got anybody watching on the internet, don't forget you can submit questions. We are happy to ask them for you live. So go ahead and do that. Does anybody in the audience have anything that they would like to say? Yeah, please.
I was wondering if there is going to be a volume 2, and how many other graphic novels did you put out like this one?
There will be a volume 2 of Goldie Vance. We are serializing that in issues right now. I think we're up to number 6.
6 is
6 out?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've ordered through 8. So yeah.
Okay.
So you've got to write it.
They're written through 8. There will also be a 3rd volume, which is what I was working on outlining in my hotel room, and why I wasn't down here at 10 on the dot. Yeah, so that's gonna keep going for a while. And as far as other graphic novels I've done, I've got a bunch on the table here.
I think that's everything that was in print. We may have missed something, but
that looks like everything that's in print. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Not everything that she's done is for kids necessarily.
These are mostly pretty much all for kids. Kids are young adults.
Yeah. Very good. Anyone else? I'll keep talking if you want me to. Yeah.
Yeah, the question is it hard to split my career between younger readers and older readers, adults? Yes and no. As far as the writing, neither of them. It's actually easier for me to write for adults because it's been a long time since I was a kid at this point. When I started out, it was pretty easy for me to write teenage characters and younger characters. And the older I get, the harder it gets to reconnect with that. Which I think is part of why I'm leaning more towards action adventure and historical type stuff when I'm writing for kids, because it's less grounded in reality. The part that's actually hard is that you're building two separate audiences, and publishers are, especially book publishers, they don't really like it when you move around too much in terms of the kind of work that you're doing. So if I wanted to do a graphic novel for adults with a book publisher, I don't even know where I would take that. There are not very many places you can sell a book like that, and the audience it's a lot smaller. So really, if I want to be writing for adults, it's like superheroes are the best place for me to be working. But that's also not, I'm not really writing for adults. It's a book like Batgirl is supposedly aimed at women in their 20s. That's what my editors told me. But I also know people are buying it for their 5-year-olds. So it's like a weird sort of riddle in your brain. Like, how do I make everybody happy with this book and hopefully not traumatize any little kids who are going to be reading it or make their parents too mad at me? So yeah, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
I gotta say, I never think that tiny amount of trauma is a terrible thing. I mean,
Yeah.
All of my favorite children's fiction, and even when I was a kid, was all stuff that was edgy and kind of intense. I mean, I particularly think Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh,
That is like the scariest movie in the
I'm
world.
still traumatized. I don't want to go back and watch that now.
Oh, I love watching it now, right? We've watched it a dozen times, but it's freaky. It's a freaky movie, full of just crazy ideas, and yet it's also just great for kids. I don't think we should necessarily shy away from traumatizing you guys with a little tiny.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like Compass South is basically like it's the darkest book that I've written. It's pretty dark. It's violent. The next volume, which is called Knife's Edge, which is out next June, is darker and more violent. It's way darker than Batgirl, but I don't know. It's for kids.
Yeah.
It's for middle schoolers.
Yeah.
You say that you have like a favorite superhero or anything?
How do you pick a favorite?
Yeah.
They're so different. At this point, I kind of feel like I want to write anybody to let me write, because then I get to dig into who that character is and see what makes them cool and different. I got to write a Wonder Woman short for the that 75th anniversary thing, which I'm not even sure. I think it's out. Is it out next week?
Yeah.
Next month?
Maybe next week.
They sent me my comps,
Soon.
so I know that it's coming
It's
out
print.
soon. Yeah. And that was really fun. I'd love to write her again. She's both kind of similar and very different from Batgirl. They're both kind. And I think that's the thing they have in common. But as far as like everything else, they're totally different. I'd love to write a villain main character or an anti-hero. I think that would be super fun.
Interesting. So let's go to Goldie Vance a little bit specifically. Did you read like Nancy Drew, that kind of thing as a kid as well? Were you interested in girl detectives already, or was it something that you came to, later as an adult that, this would be an interesting thing to do?
Actually, what happened was that my editors, Daphne Plebin and Shannon Waters, called me up and were like, hey, do you want to do a girl detective book? And I was like, yes, that sounds super fun. So this has been Daphne's pet project for a while, was to do a girl detective book. I did not read the Nancy Drew books. I watched Veronica Mars. That was a big one for me. I didn't read the Hardy Boys. I feel like actually the stuff that I'm drawing on, I never actually read.
Right.
So I'm kind of making it up. But I read Harriet the Spy. And everybody has a sense of what those books are like. That was they wanted a throwback sort of flavor.
Yeah.
And I think that's just permeated the pop culture to the degree that you don't really have to have a super strong grasp on that kind of story to write one.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of noir type stuff, so I'm familiar with detective books and detective tropes.
Is it challenging to come up with mysteries?
It's a nightmare.
The clues and
yes.
Do you have to start at the end and work backwards to make the clues work, or
kind of
are you making it up as you go along and hoping that it all fits?
It's a little bit of back and forth. The thing that's really been helpful for me so now I'm writing the third arc, and it's starting to kind of get easier. Really what you have to do is figure out who's my villain, what's their beef, like what's their damage, why would they do something like this, and then once you have that, you sort of work backwards and forwards and throw in some red herrings and the clues and stuff like that. It's a lot of research. That's really the hardest part, is coming up with a believable mystery.
Sure.
Kind of believable.
Sure. What did you guys think of the mystery of the story? Did you figure it out ahead of time? Were you surprised when you got there? Anything, guys? Quiet today. Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to put you guys on the spot. How about you, Mr. Co-host? Were you surprised by the mystery? Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah.
I just liked the book in general. It was a really good book.
Thanks.
You ponder for a minute. If you guys come up with anything, let me know. What was the thinking of making her a person of color? Was that a conscious decision, or did that just come?
That was actually Brittany. Brittany designed all the characters, and Brittany's Black, so I was basically just like, cast how you will, and she did. And I mean, she did that at the beginning, so the characters just become who they are pretty organically. I don't know.
Did it change anything about the way you approach the book or approach the characters?
Yes and no. The book is kind of a funny thing because it's historical, but it's also not like we're not dealing with the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in our world. It's just a pretty happy tame fantasy version of the 1960s. Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for you.
Okay. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot.
But no,
I was just curious,
we've had a lot of conversations about it because it is kind of a weird thing. But I think that we should be allowed to have a book, a period story that doesn't have to have like a dark undercurrent about segregation and all of that. We have plenty of those books, and this is just not that story. This is a fun, happy, escapist type of story.
Were you surprised by hopefully not, but by the positive reaction towards the book? Because this was originally solicited as a 4-issue miniseries, and then all of a sudden, I think the orders came in so high that Boom was very happy, and it became and this is issue number 5 of 4 was literally how it
Yeah.
was listed on
Yeah, I've heard that from other retailers. Well, we were always kind of hoping that it would do well enough to go to series, and it did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the response has actually really been great. I wasn't sure what to expect.
Yeah.
People have been really sweet and supportive, and I've gotten to meet lots of them at conventions and stuff like that, and it makes me really happy.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. Hi. How
Hi.
are you? Very good. So we're talking about. Oh, hey, Elizabeth has a question. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
So I organize a comic book and arts club at a high school where I work, and the majority of our artists are girls,
Mhm.
and they're teen girls, and they're, as you can see, still asleep on this fine Sunday morning.
As they should be.
Yes, but their interest, what I've been hearing from you as you've been talking is that your editors are women, you're working with women artists, you are a woman artist and writer yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're wondering is what the opportunities are like for women in comics, and what kind of advice would you give to young women artists who are like really into it and drawing right now?
Well, it's so interesting that you're saying that most of or did you say you teach? It's a club. Okay. What I always hear from professors in comics courses is that most of their students are women as well. So this is something that really started with the manga boom and has continued on. Like their comics has a huge female readership all of a sudden, and I think that I may have been part of sort of the first wave of that, because I came up with this group of other female cartoonists. Raina is a good friend of mine, Lucy Knisley, Jen Wang, Vera Brasgel, Dylan McConis, Erica Millen, Jillian Mariko Tamaki. I'm probably forgetting people, but they're all my friends, and we all sort of came up at the same time, and we're all still friends. So I've always had this core of friends in comics who are also women, and most of my editors have been women. My main editor on Batgirl, Mark Doyle, is actually my first male editor, which is kind of crazy. As far as advice, in traditional book publishing, if you're doing comics there are tons of other women. You don't feel like a sitting duck. You don't feel alone. Superhero comics feels very different to me. This is the first time that I've been working in the part of comics that's mostly male, and you really, really feel it. When I do panels, DC panels, usually I'm the only woman on stage, and it feels very different. As advice, I don't know. There are tons of women out there. Find them on the internet or on Twitter. There are Facebook groups. Go to conventions and check out Artist Alley and Small Press. That's usually where you'll find the biggest concentration of female artists, because a lot of them are running their own imprints and stuff like that, because they didn't necessarily feel like their work would fit in to the mainstream. So they're doing it for themselves, and that's awesome. There are barriers and there are doors and there are glass ceilings, but I do think it's getting better for real.
One of the things I'd say too is I think that if you look at the list of best-selling comics,
Raina.
well, it's Raina, but if you look at the mass market books, what sells in the bookstores, what circulates the best, generally speaking, it's like 6 to 8 of the 10 are by female cartoonists, or have themes that are appealing to women. And so, I think that while there has been, a culture that used to exist for comics. I think it's very, very rapidly changing right now.
Mhm.
And we've in terms of sales, we've certainly reached more than parity. And I think as in terms of socialization, you know, where the money goes is how people learn how to behave. And so I think that if there
Especially publishers.
Yes, especially publishers. So I think if there are issues still in superhero publishing today, I think that 10 years from now, when your students are grown up, those issues won't be gone, because it takes multiple generations to make problems go away. But I think they will be much less reduced from what they are. And I don't get the sense that they're terrible today. It's just it's a, you know, you're kind of in a boys club. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Everybody's been super nice and super supportive. And I mean, DC and Marvel, they know that these books that are targeted to women specifically are selling really well. And when those books sell well, they hire more of us. And once we're on the inside, we can hire our friends.
Yep.
And that's it. You know, it takes a long time, but it's definitely changing.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did they send any questions?
That was a big one.
That was the big one. Okay.
Yeah, like where you really about the opportunity for women in comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good news.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people like Spike, who does Iron Circus comics, she started that imprint and it's like doing crazy well. And it's mostly comics by creators of color, LGBTQ creators, and women. And she's just like, she's doing incredibly well. So if you want like an awesome role model, I would say like look for Spike for sure.
Did you read the book? Did you read this one? No.
Not yet.
Is that a cat in the carrier? It's a dog? That's awesome.
Awesome. What was I going to ask next? So because of the sudden success of this, did you have to rush into production for the second story arc?
Kinda.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really think that far ahead in terms of arcs because they're so complicated. I can really only have one arc in my head at a time for this book. Yeah, they're hard. They're so hard to outline.
Yeah. Okay. You got something, Ben? No.
Not really.
All right. Audience, I can keep asking questions. I just don't want to. I don't want to dominate the thing. No, no one else got it. Okay. So, craft from a craft point of view, when you're doing your own comics, you're doing the lettering as well.
Sometimes,
Most
yeah.
of the cases, yeah. Is that a challenge for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard, and it's a specific skill set which I don't really have. So it's always a pleasure to be lettered by somebody else. But with the graphic novels especially, we get so much copy editing. I have a very hardcore editor. I love her so much. But we're talking like 5, 6, 7, 8 copy editing and editorial passes. So it's pretty helpful for me to do the lettering myself because then I can change everything. Otherwise, it would be going through yet another person.
Wow. So are you finding that you're having to like completely white out balloons and start again to make things fit, or?
Well, I mean, I do it all digitally now because
Oh.
I have to make so many changes that it just doesn't make sense to actually draw the balloons on paper because then I'd be redrawing the whole panel, basically patching it. Plus, I wish that I could. I mean, it's beautiful. I would definitely be hiring somebody else to do that because it's an art form, hand lettering. But the other reason that it's helpful to do it digitally is that when you do foreign editions of books, it's a lot easier for them to adjust the book and make it look really good in another language if they can adjust the balloon size.
How much are you thinking about your audience when you're writing versus just writing for yourself? Like how, I mean, is there a point where because you're primarily doing young adult or kids stuff, are you, I don't want to say writing down because it's not writing down.
No, I know what you're saying. I'm always thinking about my audience, like always. And it's not writing down so much as wanting to write a story that's gonna be appealing and relatable to the people who are going to be reading it. So that's really what I think about. I'm on a lot of panels where people are like, no, you know, I just write for myself. Like, well, good for you. I mean, that sounds nice. But I mean, if you're writing something like a commercial comic book, you got to think about your audience. Otherwise, go do your art comic by yourself, that's great too. But it's like if you were making a blockbuster, you'd want it to be fun for the whole family. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Do you have, how do I frame this question? What would you rather be doing? Would you rather be doing adaptations? I mean, because Batgirls, even though you're writing original stories, it's kind of an adaptation in a way.
Kind of.
You know? Versus something like Chiggers, which is very personal and very...
I like both.
Yeah.
I honestly really like both. It's just very different. With Batgirl, that's fun because there's all this history. There are all these characters that other people have come up with. And you're starting in the middle of a story without having to explain a whole lot in a way that you can't if you're just writing something totally new. It's like getting to play with somebody else's toys is what it's really like. And I like knowing that every issue is going to have some sort of central mystery that'll kind of be resolved, or like you'll get a piece of it in that issue and there'll be like a fight or two, and they'll be really cool. And I have to have those elements. It's you've got this framework and it's like, how do I make every issue fun and different, but also include all of these different specific elements that have to be there. We have to hear somebody say Batgirl. We have to see Batgirl in her costume. All that stuff has to happen, and you find a way to like slot it in.
When an interesting question about the fights. Are you choreographing the fights, or are you
somewhat?
I've literally seen some scripts from writers just page 3 through 7 fight. You know, and they just leave it to the artist.
This just came up on Twitter. Who writes like that? I cannot conceive of writing a fight scene that way. How do you? Because okay. I have a lot of feelings about fight scenes. Fight scenes are the moment where your internal conflict becomes external, generally. It's about something. A good fight scene is loaded with emotion. It's not just people hitting each other. And if you're just writing, they fight, such a missed opportunity. I mean, you want to have like tons of reversals. Like people are... I love doing the superhero fight scenes because you can have people talking throughout the fight. And my editors always make me rein it back, so that's not realistic. But I'm like, I mean, come on, it's not, of course it's not realistic. It's a superhero comic. But I love that you can have people yelling at each other about their feelings or like the issues that they're dealing with, and also hitting each other and like bouncing off walls and all of that. So I do choreograph it pretty heavily, especially with Batgirl, because there's like that MMA stuff, and I thought about it a lot, and I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I'll often, if I'm writing a very specific fight, I will find the exact move I want in a YouTube video and just put that in my script and be like, this move at whatever time code, this is what I'm talking about. So those take me a really long time to write and think about.
That sounds like a lot of work.
But if I don't know what it should look like in my head, how's the artist gonna be able to translate it? And it just seems very like lazy and unfair to write they fight and be like, okay, artists, like figure that out.
Yeah. So when you do something like that, do you give like super specific details about what you want, and then they just do exactly that, or is it somewhat general?
I get pretty specific, but I'm always like, if you don't think this is working, or if you have a different idea, then we should try that. It's really the dialogue and what's like who's winning and who's losing at whatever moment. That's the stuff that's really important to me.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the people who do it that they fight, it's when they're writing Marvel style, where it's a very plot oriented script rather than a dialogue oriented script.
Is Marvel style the one where you put the dialogue in after?
Right, exactly. Where you plot the story out, you hand a synopsis to the artist. The artist then breaks the issue down, and then you go and you dialogue it later.
Yeah,
that's really
it's so crazy.
No,
it sounds like a nightmare.
And that's the way comics were produced for the majority of comics for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never understood being able to, like that. Like I could never wrap my head around that.
I mean, I guess I could kind of see it working.
Yeah.
I mean, I outline pretty heavily before I write anything, but still.
Well, it seems like you would have to really be simpatico with your artist.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have to know who your artist is and really
write to them.
And I think in a lot of cases, maybe not in things that you're doing, but certainly in a lot of cases of superhero comics, you have no idea who's going to be drawing your comic.
Yeah, I mean, for Goldie Vance and for Batgirl, I've been match made with artists by my editors, which is cool with me. They've all been delightful and super talented.
Brittany's really good.
Brittany's great. She's fantastic. But yeah, I don't usually know who I'm working with until after I've already pitched the arc.
So that's got to be a challenge when you're writing too, yeah? Because obviously I think that when you work with someone and you know who it is and you know what they like to draw, for example, you can move your script towards that. In fact, I know someone like Neil Gaiman won't write a script unless he knows exactly who's drawing it.
Wow.
So he can go, oh, this person doesn't like drawing horses, so there are no horses in this comic. Even if my story had a horse in it, but I know that the artist just doesn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just write what I'm gonna write, and hope that my artist will either be into it or tell me if there's a real problem. That's never come up with Compass South. I got super lucky because I wrote this heavily researched historical book, and it features a lot of tall ships, including this whole section going around Cape Horn where there's a storm, which you can see there. And I got really lucky because my artist got super into the tall ship stuff and became obsessed with them, because I would never draw this. I would die. I mean, it was hard enough to write it. I had to find these specific reference books that explained how ships would work in whatever situation, like environmental situation, weather, and also explained how the sails worked, because I had to, when I was scripting that, I had to explain what was going on with all of the sails. And there are 3 masts, right? 3 masts, and each mast has 3 sails on it, and they're all very important. So I was writing these scripts, and it'd be like, this is what's the top sails furled, or what. I don't remember any of the terminology because it's been a couple of years since I wrote the book. But I can't imagine what a nightmare that book would be for most artists, and she was into it. So.
Actually, this brings me to an interesting side question, because I don't know the answer to this. Have you drawn something that someone else has written? I mean, you may have drawn a page or 2 here, but anything substantial? No.
No.
Yeah. Do you think you could do that?
I don't think I'd like it at all.
Yeah. This is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not super versatile as an artist.
Really good though.
Thank you. I appreciate
No,
it.
you really are.
But I also like when I'm writing for myself, I write to my I write to my weaknesses more than I write to my strengths. So I can avoid the stuff that I'm really bad at drawing generally because I just don't write it into the book.
Because I definitely recommend to everyone here and in the audience, I thoroughly recommend Jiggers, which is her all the way around, and it's really really good. It's really
Thanks.
Really good. So, okay, well I think I've kind of run out of questions.
Anybody?
Nothing came on the internet.
It's early.
Well, it
It's
is early.
Sunday.
All right, well, I want to thank you for coming out.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thanks for bringing me up.
Thank you for Goldie Vance because we really liked this book and
Thanks.
we thought it was a lot of fun and you guys all loved it, right? Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. And I just want to remind everybody that next Saturday at 10 a.m. we do this again with Raina for Ghosts.
Yay.
And that's going to be a scary amount of people in here. So yeah, I'm actually really nervous about talking to her. She's
Why?
Because she's so huge. She's the biggest author in comics today.
Yes, but you know her, right?
I know her, sure. That doesn't mean I'm not nervous, right? Everybody gets nervous. It's normal. Ghost was actually September's book.
Okay.
Yeah. We're just because it was a little out of order. We have to do that sometimes. But yeah. Anyway, so Goldie Vance, great book. Thank you again, Hope, for coming out.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll see y'all next week. Yeah, good. Yay! Hopefully that wasn't too terrible.